Hi everybody, I'm Matthew Mitcham. You may remember me from such Olympic Games as Beijing 2008 and somewhat less memorably, London 2012. You may also remember me from this year's season of Dancing with the Stars. But I guess the main reason I'm here is, apart from being a diver, I'm also a men's health ambassador and a mental health ambassador. I'm also a uni student. I'm in my second year of my Bachelor of Science, majoring in linguistics, which basically means that I use lots of big words in an effort to sound more photosynthesis. But the real reason I'm here is because Ian Thorpe couldn't make it. No, I'm only kidding. I'm here to talk about my history with depression and anxiety. And you might think, what in the name of Madonna would an Olympic gold medalist have to be depressed about? And that's a really important point. I mean, we all know that some people's depression and anxiety comes about because of trauma, but there's also a large group of people whose depression and anxiety comes about just for genetic predispositions or other factors. And it's these people who often shame themselves because they feel like their depression is unjustified, that they don't have a proper reason for it, which compounds the depression itself. And that was my experience. So as a child, I grew up with a mum whose monthly visits from Auntie Flo seemed to go on for about 27 days of the month, and then she'd be fine for the other 3. And she would rage at me. She was a single parent. She had a pretty tough time suffering with her own depression and alcoholism, and I probably didn't help it. I probably did exacerbate it a little bit, but I remember thinking and feeling quite neglected as a child and thinking, you know what, maybe if I'm the best in the world at something, then my mum will love me, then everyone will love me. I hated my mum's temperament and the way with which she kind of raged at me, and so I vowed to become the exact opposite of her, and so I suppressed my anger altogether, and I think that would have contributed greatly to the depression that I suffered as a teenager. From about 14, I started suffering from my first long bout of depression. I was diving by this stage, but I didn't tell anybody about it because I had a lot of shame around my depression. I saw it as a weakness, and especially in the macho sporting environment, I didn't want to be seen as weak, and so I didn't tell anybody about it. And because I didn't tell anybody about it, I didn't learn how to address it properly, and so I started developing these coping mechanisms that were actually quite destructive: self-harm, binge drinking, and eventually drug abuse. And diving was a large part to do with that depression. I had a really tumultuous relationship with the coach, and the training environment that I was training in, because I'd started diving at such a young age, much too young to have established my sexual identity, I felt like, because I'd been training with these people for several years already, that I couldn't then come out to them because I felt like I'd been effectively lying to them for the preceding several years. But I kept on with diving because I felt like it was my only ticket to being special. You know, that little thought in the back of my mind, you know, maybe if I'm the best in the world at something, my mum will love me, everyone will love me. So I stuck with it for several years, even though it was contributing greatly to my depression. It wasn't until I was 18 years old that it all became much too much for me, and I finally did quit. But I didn't. Yeah, I retired at the ripe old age of 18 with like no intention of ever returning to the sport. But I didn't actually address my depression. I just continued along the path of escapism and self-medication by spending too much time in seedy nightclubs and taking too many party drugs and basically just escaping my feelings. It was around that time that a man, a diving coach in Sydney called Chava Sabrino, sent me a text message. And the text message said, "If you ever want to start diving again, I'll always have a place in my squad for you." And it was just the way that text message was worded, you know, "if you ever," in a very nurturing, not pushy way. And that was the first time I'd ever had an interaction with a coach like that, who seemed to care for my welfare as a human more than my welfare as an athlete. And so I moved from the city that I was in, Brisbane. I moved down to Sydney and started diving again. And this was kind of only 15 months before the Beijing Games, which was not ideal timing for an Olympic campaign. But I felt like, there was unfinished business, and that I really needed to just make an Olympic team. Then I would feel a bit more fulfilled. In that year off, I actually had a chance to kind of explore and become comfortable with my sexuality. And so when I moved to Sydney, I had this a brilliant opportunity for a fresh start. And so I promised myself that I would be absolutely 100% upfront and honest with absolutely everybody I met. And I think this had a really profound effect on my self-esteem because, I don't know, I mean, people interacted with me in a much better way. And I think it's because when you're holding something back, people can see that, but they don't know what the obstacle is because, you're not being forthright with them. And once you lay it all out there, people know what the terrain is, they know what the obstacles are, and they know how to navigate it, making for much better interactions. For example, I've never had more straight mates since coming out, and the boys actually make me laugh. When I go away to international competitions, it's apparently become cool to have a platonic gay boyfriend, and so they get all possessive amongst me, especially when they get drunk, which is very sweet. The other thing about being upfront and honest and being myself and moving to this new training environment where I was now accepted for who I was that I felt a lot more validated as a person, that people accepted me and loved me for exactly who I was, and that had a profound effect on my self-esteem as well. I was happy for the first time in a long time, and I was training because I wanted to, not because I felt like it was my ticket to specialness, and that happiness meant that I could train with such passion and intensity and vigour that probably wasn't sustainable for a long period of time, but I wanted to get to the Olympics, my very first Olympics, and I just wanted to make the team, and then I thought I would make my big gold medal winning performance in London. Well, I guess we all know what happened in Beijing. I awesomed all over the place. I naively thought that I was fixed. I don't know why, but I thought that I'd had my period of depression and that you only suffered from depression once in your life and then you move on. What I learnt was after all of the adulation and the high of the Olympics wore off, I learnt that depression doesn't just go away unless you actually address it, unless you actually come to understand what the underlying causes of your depression was. And unless you do that, it just lies dormant, waiting for another opportunity to present itself. And because I never had addressed it as a teenager, when it hit me again, when I was about 22, it hit me really hard. And so I went straight back to the last coping mechanism that I'd used as a teenager, and that was hard drugs, in particular crystal meth. And I tried and tried and tried, and I knew what I was doing was so taboo, and so I absolutely could not tell anybody what I was doing. And it wasn't until it got much too bad, when I tried to get off it myself so many times, that I realised that I simply could not fix this problem by myself. And so I finally, as an absolute last resort, reached out for help, and I went to rehab. And that was the most amazing experience for me, because that's where I learnt how bad my self-esteem was. That's where I learnt that the drinking and the drugging were a symptom of my depression rather than the cause of it. That's where I learnt that my mental health was my own responsibility, and that taking care of my mental health was a way to actually improve my self-esteem. And so I continued to see a psychologist twice a week for the whole year leading up to the London Games, obviously to help me with my sobriety, but also to help me deal with all these external pressures, the fact that I was expected to be going to the London Olympic Games to defend my Olympic title. And so anything other than a win would seem like a failure. And so I got to London, and I did my competition, and I did my last dive, and I surfaced not to rapturous applause like I had 4 years earlier. I surfaced to the shower of my own splash because I bombed my dive so badly. And I missed out on making the finals by 1 place. And so television screens were streaming my snot and tears cameras were streaming my snot and tears to television screens all over the world. And these thoughts that were going through my head, making me sadder and sadder, like I hadn't done it, I'd sabotaged myself with all of my self-destructive behaviours. My family had wasted all this money to come all the way over to London to see me, and I had to do the walk of shame through the media zone. And just within 5 minutes, I was able to actually turn those thoughts around, thoughts that were making me so, like, turning me into a blubbering mess, really. Yeah, I mean, my family had paid all that money to come over to London, but they wanted to, and no, I hadn't done my best, but I had tried my best, and like I could never have tried more in the lead up to the London Games because I'd had all these re-injuries, so I probably should have been training less, and no, I hadn't done my best, but yeah, I had tried my best, and I was okay, despite everything that had just happened. And so that reframing, learning how to do all that reframing from seeing a psychologist, I learnt that being able to turn that awful, horrible experience around was kind of a mental and an emotional win for me, which frankly meant more to me than that win in Beijing. And so after London, because of that experience, I decided to keep on seeing a psychologist because I really felt that the investment in my mental health had been worth it. And so I continued to learn things like how to let go of old resentments because I was the only person suffering from them. You know, like sometimes it's just easier to realise that the other person was born an idiot, or, you know, like learning what was within my control and what wasn't within my control. You know, like I wish I could just be hot and dumb, but I guess that's not my journey. And the few years since London have been my most productive, funnily enough, because I've been clean and sober. It's amazing what you can get done. I am still diving. There was one thing that was missing from my trophy cabinet after winning an Olympic gold medal and a World Cup gold medal. I finally got the Commonwealth Games gold medal last year in Glasgow. I wrote a book. Oh, thank you. I wrote a picture book, which is otherwise known as an autobiography, which has a large theme around mental health. We then adapted it into a stage show called Twists and Turns. Pretty good pun, hey? Twists and Turns, yeah. But the reason why I speak about my experiences so candidly is because I think there are not enough good role models in the world. And like what I believe a role model is, it's not someone who never makes mistakes, because frankly that's really unrealistic. My idea of a role model is someone who makes mistakes but who learns from them and evolves from them and yeah, becomes a better person from them. And so that's why I do share my experiences about such taboo subjects like mental health and depression, anxiety and substance abuse. And because I believe that the more that I speak about it, the more that we all speak about it, the more it will start to break down the stigma and the shame that prevented me from reaching out to wonderful services like this when I was a teenager. So that's why I do it. Thank you.